Today we're going to go over lesson 3.7, equations of lines in a coordinate plane. So we're going to start with information that comes straight out of Algebra 1. So many of the things that we're going to talk about today are things that should look familiar to you. So let's start with slope. When you have slope, it tells you how steep the line is. Now, the equation that we normally use is the letter that stands for slope is m, and the equation for slope is y sub 2 minus y sub 1 over x sub 2 minus x sub 1. Now, you use this when you're given 2 points. So you would have to have 2 coordinates given to you. And so when they are given to you, I always just call the very first one x1, y1, and the second one x2, y2, and then you plug it into the equation and subtract. So when you look at the slope of the line that's over here on the right, now let's practice this. We have 2 coordinates. We have the coordinate 8, 4, and 2, 1. It doesn't really matter which one I write down first. So I have the coordinates x1, y1, x2, y2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the x coordinates and I'm going to subtract them. Normally you start with the second one and you subtract the first one. So we would have slope is 2 minus 8. Now we're going to do the same thing with the y. Since I started with the second coordinate, I need to continue and start with the second coordinate and then subtract it with the other y. So this is 1 minus 4, and that goes in your denominator. So let's keep going. 2 minus 8, that's a negative 6. And 1 minus 4 is a negative 3. Now, that's not simplified. Negative 6 over negative 3. Well, first of all, we can easily make 2 negatives into a positive and then say, well, 6 over 3 is 2, or 2 over 1. With slope, we usually leave the 1 on the bottom because we want to see how many you go up and how many you go over. So just to remind you, 2 is how many you're going to rise, and 1 is how many you're going to run. Okay, so let's keep going. When you have a positive slope, it means from left to right, it goes upward. Now, if you have a negative slope from left to right, it goes downward. When you have a zero slope, just imagine if you go to a hill and there's no slope to the hill. So it's completely flat. That's what an undefined slope, or that's what a zero slope is. There's no slope there. Now, undefined slope is opposite of a zero slope. So zero slope goes from side to side. It is horizontal. So an undefined slope is vertical and it goes straight up and down. And my computer's acting weird. Stop. Okay, here we go. My hand hits things where I don't mean to. Okay, undefined slope is when you go straight up and down. So let's practice this. We have some slopes and let's subtract. x1, y1, x2, y2. It's the change in y over the change in x. So we're going to subtract the y's first. So for slope, I have 4 minus 2. And then I get my y values and I subtract those. I have 3 minus a negative 1. Now, as you can see, that's a little tricky because minus a negative turns into plus a positive. So I'm left with 2 over 4, which is a half. Let's keep going. Same thing. Let's take the y values and subtract them. 1.2 minus 1.1. And then in your denominator, you're going to subtract the x's. So it's a negative 1.2 minus 0.5. Okay, so what's 1.2 minus 1.1? That is 0.1. And a negative 1.2 minus 0.5 is a negative 0.17. So, yes, you can leave it here. Some people don't like that decimal on top. So if you multiply and move this decimal one place, you can move this decimal one place. That's really the same as multiplying by 10. So we could have 10 over 17, and it is a negative. Now let's talk about the negative, guys. The negative it's a negative number. If the negative doesn't have to go on top versus go in the bottom versus go in the front. So as long as there's one negative, you can put it wherever you like. Makes no difference. So we have x1, y1, x2, y2. Let's subtract the y values. 1 minus 1 over, now let's subtract the x's, negative 1 minus negative 3. Now hopefully you see something happening here. 1 minus 1 is 0. In my denominator, I have two negatives that turn into positive. So I have 0 over 2. Okay, so what does that mean? Now think of it in real context. If I have two candy bars, can I choose to give you 0 of them? Sure. So how many candy bars would you have? You would have 0. So the bottom number can be any number, but the top number, if it's 0, the entire answer is 0. So I hope that makes sense. The bottom number is how many you have. The top number is how many you're giving away. All right, the last one, letter D. Well, we do have a little bit of a pattern here. We have a positive slope in the first one, a negative slope in the second one, a 0 slope in the third one. So let's predict what this one's going to be. What do you think? Say 5 minus negative 5. And so I subtracted the y values. And now let's subtract the x values. 2 minus 2. Now be careful. Minus a negative becomes plus a positive, so that's 10 on top. But now my denominator on bottom is 0. So think about this one. If I have 0 pieces of candy, can I give you 10 of them? As you know, that doesn't make sense. I can't give you something I don't have. So this answer is undefined. So when it's undefined and 0, try to remember which one goes up and down, which one goes back and forth. 0 slope, remember it's like the bunny hill. There's no slant to the hill at all. Now, would you want to go to this undefined hill? I mean, that's a straight down hill. That would be scary. So 0 slope, flat, undefined, it is vertical. Okay, so what we're going to do now, I'm going to give you an equation and I'm going to give you the slope. And what you have to do is you have to find the missing variable. And this is not as hard as it may seem. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out the same way as the last problems. And notice I'm labeling x1, y1, x2, y2. And apparently I can't talk and write at the same time. Okay, so I have it labeled correctly now. Let's subtract the y values. So 5 minus 3. Subtract the x values. Now, we have an r for a variable, r minus negative 4. And this time, instead of saying equals m, we have a number. Now it equals 1/4. And you get that straight from the problem. Okay, so let's simplify this. 5 minus 3 is 2. Now, minus a negative becomes plus a positive, so really there's nothing else I can do. And I'm just going to bring down that 1/4. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to cross multiply. So 2 times 4 equals 1 times r plus 4. Now, did it really matter which side I put the information on? And it doesn't. But the 2 has to be multiplied by the 4 because they are opposites. So 2 times 4 is 8. And if I distribute the 1, I get r plus 4. Now let's just solve it using basic one-step equations. The r is 4. Okay, so we solved it. We know what r has to be to fit this equation. Now, this is a formula that you used a lot. 1, y equals mx plus b. Just a quick reminder, m stands for slope, b stands for y-intercept. Now, the other equation, which you may have used but maybe not as much, is the point-slope form. Now, point-slope form, your slope still is the m, but this x1 and y1, these represent the point. So this is x is the x value, and the y1 is the y value. So I'm going to show you how to do all of it. On the next one, it says we're going to graph some equations. So it just depends on how it's set up, which kind of equations you like to work with. Now, when it says graph it, it doesn't say you have to graph from one way or another. So when I look at this first one, y equals 3x minus 4, to me, it looks very similar to y equals mx plus b. So that's why I'm going to graph it using this equation. So my b value is -4. So what is your slope? Well, your slope's right here. Your slope is 3. Now remember, all numbers are over 1, so really the slope is 3/1. So what you're going to do is you're going to take the b value, and you're going to go to the y-axis, and you're going to go and find -4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's your starting place. Now from there, I'm going to take my slope, and remember, it's just rise over run. So no matter if it's positive or negative, I always rise. So I'm going to rise up 3. So I go up 1, 2, 3, and I run over 1. Let's go up again. 1, 2, 3, run 1. And you can do this several times. I usually kind of do it all the way across my paper. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay, so if you do this several times, it makes a really nice way. So you can just connect these dots. And even with that, my line's still not very straight. So draw it in as straight as you can. And this equation is letter A. So to save space, we will graph 2 equations on each line. Or 2 equations on each, I can't talk. We're going to do 2 equations on each graph. There we go. Now on letter B, notice it looks similar to point slope form. So this is y minus y1 equals m, which is your slope, x minus x1. So you need to find your starting point, which is your slope. So the slope is a little bit tricky, guys, so pay attention. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my x and y value, which looks like it's 5, -2, but what you have to do is you have to change the signs because in the equation there's built-in negatives. So when those numbers were plugged in, the numbers were switched. So when you pull them back out, you have to switch them back. So the 5 is really -5, and the 2 is not negative, it's really positive. So that's your point. So let's start, and I'm going to use a different color. Let's start by graphing that point. So you start at 0, 0, and go back 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up 2. 1, 2. So that is your starting point. Now from there, you're going to do your slope. Now your slope is this -3. So remember, I usually write slopes over 1 unless there's already a number in the denominator. Now I know other teachers teach this differently, maybe, but slope is rise over run. So even when it's negative, I still rise up 3. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3. Now here's where I hear from other kids every year I do it differently. If it's negative, I go backwards. Okay, so if you're used to going down 3 when it's negative, 1, 2, 3, and over 1, I want you to notice that the dots all match up. We're both right. Just the way I teach it is it's rise over run. And so it doesn't change when it's negative. It's still rise over run. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple more on my paper. 1, 2, 3, 1. 1, 2, 3, 1. Okay, let's connect them. Oh, it's not straight. Try to do it as straight as you can. And this is letter B. Okay, so now when you get to letter C and D, one's vertical, one's horizontal. They look weird, don't they? Now, we have to remember where the X and Y coordinates are, or axis. Here's your X-axis. The Y-axis goes up and down. So if you want to graph Y equals -2, you're going to go to the Y-axis. And so this is at 2. So let's go up to 2. Now this line that you're going to draw has to go through that point. Now I'm going to do this wrong, so don't do this. A lot of kids put it here. Do you see how that's on the axis? That's not right. So let's pretend y was 3. You would put a dot there and the line would be in the same place. Does that make sense? Of course that does make sense. So what has to happen when y is 2, you go to the y-axis, you find where the 2 is, and the line has to go through it. So the axis, which is the y-axis, and the line that you're drawing have to make a right angle together. Okay, do you guys see this little right angle? And that should really help you. So that's letter C. Now let's do the letter D. Go to the x-axis. Find 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You need to make a right angle with that axis. So that means it has to go up and down. So this is letter D. So for letter E, this again kind of looks like slope intercept form, but there's no intercept. So let's go back and look at it. I'm talking about this one up at the top. So the difference is there's no B. So I'm just going to plug in a 0.0 here. So the 0 is my intercept, and the -2/3 is my slope. So let's start at 0, 0. Put your dot there. Now, from 0, 0, your starting point, I want you to notice one thing. My slope is negative. Okay, so I'm going to do it the Provine's way. I'm going to go up, rise over run. So I'm always going to rise up 2. Now, if it's negative, I run to the left. And if it's positive, I run to the right. Now, if you get confused on this, think of a number line. So you just went to the number line. positives are always to the right, and negatives are always to the left. So that's how you can remember which way to run. And you guys already know it has to be rise over run. Okay, so I started at 0, 0. I went up 2. Now I'm running backwards. I'm running to the left. 3. 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. All right, so let's try to draw this in. See if you can do it a little bit more straight than I can. And this is letter E. Okay, for letter F, my starting point, my intercept is at 3. So let's find 3. 1, 2, 3. Now, my slope just says X. So what does that mean? What number's in front of X? What number is right there? Is it a 0 or a 1? And of course, it's a 1. So what's my slope? If I rise up 1, that means I have to run 1. Now, it's positive, okay? So I still rise up 1, and then it's positive, like a number line, I'm going to the right. Up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1. Okay, so there you go. There's line F. Okay, so I tried to write directions because I know kids like directions. So if you get confused, you can always go back and read what I'm doing. But since I'm giving you verbal directions, I'm not going to read you the steps. For example, 4 says write in the equation of the line that passes through the following points. Okay, so the first step is to find your slope. We practiced it already. X1, Y1, X2, Y2. All right, let's practice this. Slope is where you subtract the Y's over subtracting the X's. So 0 minus 2, and then your denominator, you have 3 minus 0, for a grand total of a negative 2/3. Okay, so that's your slope. Now, what we need now is to plug your slope and an x and y value into y equals mx plus b. So this is your choice here. Okay, so I'm going to erase some of this stuff. This is your choice. You're going to pick. Do you want to pick the first coordinate or the second coordinate? Because we know this is x and y. So like the x coordinate's just going to go in here and the y coordinate's going to go in here. Now, I just chose the first one. You can choose the second one if you like. Now, do you have a value for the m right here? And I think you do. Look right over there. You know it's negative 2/3. So what we're doing is we're trying to find b, which b stands for the intercept. So let's plug in all this information. My y is now 2. My slope is a negative 2/3. My x value right here is 0. Now, we picked the good point, honestly. It's a lot easier because what's anything times 0? It's 0. So everything I just highlighted turns into 0. So what is the value of b? B is 2. So, guys, we are 99% finished. All we have to do now is just write the answer. We have everything. We have the slope. We have the intercept. So I'm going to go back to y equals mx plus b, and I'm going to plug it in. So y equals m. What's my m? We already found it, negative 2/3. Now this x, you have to drop it down, plus b, and my b is 2. You're finished. This is your answer. Done. Okay. Now, every question here is some variation of what we just did. For instance, part B is even easier because it already gives you the slope. So I'm just thinking out loud here. If you already know the slope, could we maybe plug it into slope and plug in a point? Do we know a point? Sure, we know a point, don't we? Now, can you keep using the same way that we just did? And you can. You definitely can. But just to practice, we also have this trick. So let's practice this. So again, I'm using this equation right up here at the top. So it's y minus y1 equals m parenthesis x minus x1. Okay, so if you notice, same equation. Okay, now the x1, y1, that's the little point that they provided. In the m, they also provided, so everything you know, you're going to plug it in. Y minus 3 equals your slope x minus, and what's x1? x1 is 3. Things I want you to notice. In the original question, the 1 and the 3 are positive, but when you plug it in, it makes it look negative. Now, it doesn't really say how to display your answer, so honestly, we can be finished. That's an equation using all the information. So we're finished. Now, this first one we did in point slope. The second one we did in slope, point slope. Okay, so let's do C like we did B. Let's use that same equation up here that I have highlighted in blue. Let's plug in x1, y1 in your slope. So y minus y1. What's y1? Well, y1 is a negative 2. Now, do you guys see you have a double negative? Make that a positive. What's your slope? It's 2, parenthesis, x minus x1. So x1 is 4. Now, you can leave it here if you like. That's an equation. Okay, now D is going to be like A. So that means we have to find the slope first. So let's subtract them. 4 minus negative 2. Four minus negative 2 over 6 minus 3. So that becomes a positive on top. So 4, 5, 6 on top. 6 minus 3 is 3. This reduces to 2. That's my slope. So if you are really digging the equation we used in letters B and C, technically you could stop and take your slope and take one of the points that I gave you and plug it into that equation. Because really, I think that's easier. But to practice how to do it, I'm going to help you find the letter B like we did in example A. So pick a point. I'm going to pick the second point this time because they're both positive, and I like positive numbers. And this is my slope. Okay. So y equals mx plus b. So do I know a y value? Sure, it's 4. Do I have an m value? Yes, it's 2. Do I have an x? Yes, it's 6. And then plus b. Okay, so let's solve for b. 4 equals 12 plus b. Subtract 12. Negative 8 equals b. Okay, but there's still no equation, so you have to write the equation now. So I'm still using the y equals mx plus b, And I'm just going to switch and put the B in here and put the M. Okay, and that's it. So y equals, my new M is 2. And then I have to put the x and then minus 8. All right, guys, so that is all there is to today's lesson. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or come to one of my tutorials. Thanks.